After US President Donald Trump signaled that the US would step back from defending Ukraine, France's President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer flew to meet him in Washington, D.C. But on Friday, a disastrous meeting between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky left Europe scrambling to come up with a peace plan without the US. Then on Monday evening, Trump announced that the US was suspending military aid to Ukraine, adding yet more urgency to Europe's efforts. So in this video, we'll recap what's been happening recently, the peace plan outlined at the London summit, and what Europe will do next about Ukraine. We're getting remarkably close to 1 million subscribers, and currently 72% of you haven't yet subscribed. So lend us a hand and subscribe today. First though, let's recap what's been happening. Last month, Trump signaled a shift in US foreign policy, indicating that the US may not commit to a security guarantee for Ukraine. Trump also held what he called a lengthy and highly productive phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The US held peace talks with Russia in Saudi Arabia without Ukraine or Europe's involvement, and Trump's defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, suggested that Ukraine should abandon its NATO bid and concede territory to Russia. This all prompted concerns in the European media that Trump's stance on Ukraine was approximating that of Putin. But if there was any doubt remaining regarding the official US position, then it was quickly stamped out by the events of last week. Trump had tabled a US-Ukraine minerals deal that would have granted the US access to billions of dollars worth of mineral resources, oil, and gas in eastern Ukraine, without offering a Ukrainian security guarantee in return. Trump argued that the revenue from the sale of Ukrainian resources would compensate the US for its previous spending on Ukrainian aid, although we should say that he's reliably overstated how much the US has given to Ukraine. Anyway, Zelensky was scheduled to formalize this minerals deal at the White House on Friday, but to improve Ukraine's chances of actually getting a US security guarantee, prior to the meeting, both Macron and Starmer traveled to visit Trump earlier in the week, and made the case for a broad transatlantic alliance supporting Ukraine. But as we're sure you've seen, Zelensky's meeting with Trump descended into a very ugly, very public argument in which Trump accused Zelensky of being ungrateful for US support and gambling with World War III. Zelensky was then reportedly asked to leave the White House, with the US-Ukraine relationship in tatters and no deal signed. Which brings us onto the recent summit. On Sunday, Starmer hosted 18 world leaders, mainly from Europe, but also including Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. The talks led to a vague outline of a European peace deal for Ukraine, with 4 main points. These were to continue to provide military support to Ukraine and increase economic pressure on Russia, that Ukraine must be present at any peace talks, that Ukraine's defense capabilities must be boosted to deter further Russian aggression, and that a coalition of the willing will be formed to defend a peace deal in Ukraine and guarantee its future security. Now, at this point, it's not 100% clear who this will include, but it will be led by France and the UK and will probably include the Baltic states, Finland, and Canada. Conversely, Poland and Spain have both ruled out committing troops to Ukraine, so presumably won't be included. Perhaps the big question here is whether Germany will join in. While Germany was generally pretty cautious about its support for Ukraine under Olaf Scholz, the incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz has taken a much more hawkish line, and even floated the idea of a new European defence alliance to replace NATO. Beyond that, Macron also suggested to the French press that there could be a 1-month ceasefire in the air, at sea, and on energy infrastructure to see if Putin was serious about negotiations, although other European leaders have since pushed back on this. Anyway, the big question here is how Europe is actually going to pay for all of this. Even for those countries that aren't in this so-called coalition of the willing, filling the void left by the US and increasing defense spending to 3 or even 4% of GDP will cost a lot of money. While individual countries have different plans in place, Germany, for instance, is considering a constitutional amendment to loosen its long-standing fiscal rule, the debt brake, before the new parliament sits, there are at least 2 continent-wide initiatives worth mentioning. First, France, Germany, the UK and others are discussing a proposal to seize 200 billion euros of frozen Russian central bank assets for Ukraine, with French officials suggesting that Europe seize the assets if Moscow violates a future ceasefire deal in Ukraine. The second proposal, announced on Tuesday morning by the EU, is the Rearm Europe initiative, which basically involves borrowing 150 billion euros at the EU level, which EU member states can then use to fund defence spending. This is a pretty dramatic move. The EU already owes about 300 billion euros in money it borrowed to help member states through the pandemic, with no plan of how to pay it back. So borrowing more money will only make that problem more acute. So with that in mind, what happens next? Well, on Thursday, the EU will hold a summit in Brussels, where EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that she'll present a comprehensive defence plan. Given that Trump has suspended aid to Ukraine, EU leaders will be working as quickly as possible to come up with a military support plan, because a long pause in US aid could give Russia a significant advantage on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is increasing its rhetorical attacks on the West, whose unity it's long sought to undermine. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesperson, said on Monday that the fragmentation of the collective West has begun. Russia has also ruled out a role for European peacekeeping troops after a peace deal, and argues that Europe's continued military support for Ukraine is a sign that Europe doesn't really want peace. Perhaps the biggest question, though, is whether Ukraine can repair its ties with the US. Zelensky says that he still wants to sign Trump's mineral deal, but will now be under pressure to repair relations with Trump if he wants to get back US military support. This would likely involve Zelensky apologizing to Trump for, in Trump's words, disrespecting the US. But Zelensky has also made clear that he wants the White House to recognize that Russia is the aggressor, given that it launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in 2022. But as Starmer and Maloney have pointed out, the US remains an important partner for Europe on defense, for now. So Zelensky may have to set aside his grievances with Trump for the sake of Ukraine and Europe's future. If you didn't know, Too Long is our regular physical magazine, with our next issue diving deep into the people who control our world, the 25 most influential people as rated by the TLDR team and you. The next edition contains that entire ranking, as well as articles and long reads about all the most influential people, the power they hold, and how they wield their immense influence. We also discuss a variety of other topics, from the issues facing Starmer in the UK, to the rise of the new right in Europe, to if peace can really hold in Gaza. These are all topics we discuss in videos, but the reporting you'll find in Too Long is some of our best writing, with us able to spend longer on the stories than is ever possible on YouTube. If you're interested in checking it out and supporting the channel, then you can pre-order a copy right now at toolong.news. There you'll find two versions of the magazine, the standard and the premium editions. By buying the premium edition, you not only get the magazine, but you also get about 2 hours of exclusive content where the team debate and discuss their top 25 ranking, as well as reacting to the audience's vote for the very first time.
We could potentially have a monumental jump on our hands.
Yeah.
Hands up for leapfrogging into sixth.
The most powerful European country, the second biggest economy, the nuclear power that is... The nuclear power!
Yeah.
You'll also get regular access to our behind-the-scenes podcast, The Bullpen, and get your name printed in the thank you section of the magazine. Whichever edition you want, head over to toolong.news to find out more. And if you subscribe to the magazine using code SUBSCRIBENOW, you'll be able to get a copy for as low as $4.99. Anyway, thanks for your support, because Too Long really does help to fund our journalism year-round.